During a family trip, my parents told me to sleep in the car so my brother could have the room. I smirked and said, "That's cute, but I actually booked the entire floor." Their faces went pale when the manager walked in and announced, "The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the desert landscape as we drove towards the Grand Canyon." I could feel the tension in the car, not from the journey, but from the unspoken rules of favoritism that had governed our family dynamics for years. My brother Mark, the golden child, was in the front seat, his recent achievements being lauded by my parents as usual. I sat in the back, headphones on, pretending to be engrossed in music, but really, I was plotting. This trip, I decided, would be different. I had a plan, a secret that would shake the very foundation of our family's expectations. And as we pulled into the hotel parking lot, I knew the moment had come to reveal it. What would happen when I told them I had booked the entire floor? The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the desert landscape as we drove towards the Grand Canyon. My name is Alex, and I'm 24 years old. My family, consisting of my parents, Robert and Susan, my older brother Mark and I, have always been close, or so I thought. Growing up, Mark was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. He was the athlete, the scholar, the one who got all the attention. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one, often overlooked. This dynamic was never more apparent than during our annual family vacations. This year, we decided to visit the Grand Canyon, a trip planned by my parents with the usual expectation that Mark would have the best of everything. As we drove through the winding roads, the tension was palpable, not from the journey, but from the unspoken rules of favoritism that had governed our family dynamics for years. The car was filled with the usual chatter about Mark's recent achievements, his job promotion, and his upcoming marathon. I sat in the back, my headphones in, pretending to be engrossed in music, but really, I was plotting. This trip, I decided, would be different. As we approached the hotel, my parents, with their usual nonchalance, suggested, "Alex, why don't you sleep in the car tonight? Mark needs a good rest for his training." I smiled, a plan already set in motion. "That's cute, but I actually booked the entire floor." The silence that followed was thick with shock. My parents exchanged looks, their expressions a mix of surprise and confusion. Mark, ever the golden boy, just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. "You what?" my mother finally managed to say, her voice a mix of disbelief and irritation. "I booked the entire floor," I repeated, savoring the moment. "I figured since we're all here to enjoy the vacation, we might as well do it right. No more sleeping in the car for anyone." My father, always the peacemaker, tried to smooth things over. "Well, that's thoughtful, Alex. But perhaps we should have discussed this as a family?" I shrugged, keeping my tone light but firm. I thought it was time for a change. Time for us to see each other as equals, not just as the golden child and the other one. The tension didn't dissipate. It just shifted. My parents were visibly uncomfortable, not used to their plans being upended. Mark, however, seemed to be processing this new dynamic, his usual confidence slightly shaken. As we checked into the hotel, the staff, aware of my booking, treated us with a level of respect and attention that was usually reserved for Mark. I could see my parents' discomfort grow as they realized their usual tactics wouldn't work this time. The evening was spent in a suite that was far beyond what we'd ever experienced on these trips. My parents tried to maintain The hotel was grand, a sprawling resort with views of the canyon. As we pulled up, the valet took our car, and my parents, with Mark in tow, walked confidently towards the reception. I lagged behind, watching, their assured steps, their belief in the status quo unshaken. At the reception, my parents approached with their usual air of entitlement. "We have a reservation under the name Thompson," my father said, his voice carrying the weight of expectation. The receptionist, a young woman with a polite smile, checked her computer. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson, but I don't see any reservation under that name for tonight." My mother's face fell, confusion and irritation mixing. "That's impossible. We always book in advance. Mark, Did you forget to confirm? Mark, ever the dutiful son, pulled out his phone, his face turning pale as he realized there was no confirmation email. I stepped forward, my heart racing but my voice steady. Actually, I took care of the booking this time. The receptionist's eyes met mine, a flicker of recognition passing between us. Ah, yes, Mr. Alex Thompson. You've booked the entire floor for your family. We've prepared everything as per your instructions. My parents turned to me, their expressions a mix of shock and curiosity. Alex, what have you done? My mother asked, her voice tinged with a mix of annoyance and intrigue. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my secret. I've been planning this for a while. I wanted this trip to be different, not just another showcase for Mark. I've been saving up, working extra hours at the firm, and I used some of my inheritance from Aunt Lucy to make this happen. My father's eyebrows shot up. Your inheritance? But that was meant for my future, I know, I interrupted, my voice firm. But my future includes making sure we all have a fair shot at enjoying life, not just Mark. This trip, I wanted to level the playing field. Mark looked at me, his usual confidence replaced with a hint of respect. Alex, I didn't know you felt this way. I nodded, feeling the tension ease slightly. I've always been the quiet one, the one who goes unnoticed. But this time, I wanted to make sure we all get noticed, not just for what we've done, but for who we are. The receptionist handed over the keys, her smile genuine. Your suites are ready, and we've arranged for a private tour of the canyon at sunrise as you requested. My mother's eyes softened, her usual sharpness dulled by the unexpected turn of events. Alex, this is quite the surprise. It's more than a surprise, Mom, I said, my voice steady. It's a statement. I want us to see each other, really see each other, beyond the roles we've been playing. As we walked to the elevator, the atmosphere was charged with a new kind of energy. Mr. Jenkins, the hotel manager, entered the lobby just as the tension was reaching its peak. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, there seems to be a misunderstanding, he began, his voice calm but firm. Your son, Alex, has indeed made a reservation, but not for just one room. He's booked the entire floor. The room fell silent. My parents turned to look at me, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief. Mark's mouth hung open, his usual confidence shattered. I wanted to ensure we all had the best experience, I explained, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. I thought it was time for a change in how we do things. My parents' faces were a canvas of emotions, from surprise to a dawning realization of the dynamics they had perpetuated. My mother's eyes, usually sharp with judgment, softened as she processed the implications of my actions. Alex, this is quite the statement, she murmured, her voice carrying a mix of admiration and confusion. My father, always the diplomat, cleared his throat. Well, son, this is certainly unexpected, but perhaps it's an opportunity for us to reflect on how we've been as a family. Mark, who had been silent, finally spoke up. Alex, I'm sorry if I've been blind to how things have been for you. This, he gestured around, this is incredible, but it's also a wake-up call for me. The elevator doors opened, and we stepped inside. The ride up was quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts. The weight of years of unspoken grievances and overlooked feelings seemed to hang in the air, almost palpable. When we reached our floor, the doors opened to reveal a hallway lined with luxurious suites, each door adorned with a welcome sign bearing our names. The attention to detail was impeccable, reflecting the care I had put into planning this moment. We entered our suite, and the grandeur of it all was overwhelming. The panoramic windows offered a breathtaking view of the Grand Canyon, bathed in the soft hues of the setting sun. My parents stood there, taking it all in, their usual facade of control visibly crumbling. This is breathtaking, my mother whispered, her voice tinged with awe. I watched them, feeling a mix of satisfaction and sadness. I wanted us to see this together, as equals, not just as the golden child and the other one, I said, echoing my earlier sentiment. Dinner was served in our suite, a lavish spread that spoke of celebration and new beginnings. As we sat down, the conversation shifted. My parents began to share stories of their own youth, tales of struggles and dreams that I had never heard before. Mark listened intently, his usual competitive edge replaced by a genuine interest in understanding our family's history. The evening unfolded with a warmth that was unfamiliar yet comforting. We laughed, shared memories, and for the first time in a long while, I felt seen. Not as the quiet one, but as Alex, their son, with my own ambitions and feelings. As the night drew to a close, my father raised his glass. To Alex, for showing us what we've been missing, and to new beginnings, where we all get a fair shot. We clinked glasses, the sound ringing out like a promise of change. My mother reached over, squeezing my hand. Thank you, Alex. For this. For everything. In that moment, I realized that my act of defiance had not just changed our vacation, it had begun to heal the rifts within our family. The dynamics were shifting, and with it, the possibility of a new understanding, a new way of being together. I lay in bed that night, staring at the stars through the large windows. I felt a sense of peace. I had stood up, not just for myself, but for the idea that every member of a family deserves recognition and love, not just for what they achieve, but for who they are. The night was set to unfold differently than any other family vacation. My parents, now without a room, scrambled to find a solution. The hotel was fully booked, and the only available space was the car, which I had suggested with a smirk. Mark, for once, looked uncomfortable, his usual smugness replaced by a sheepish, "Look, maybe we can share a room, Alex," he suggested, his voice lacking its usual confidence. I shook my head. I think it's important for you all to experience what it's like to be on the outside for once. My parents, their pride wounded, started making calls, trying to find any nearby accommodation. The realization that their usual tactics wouldn't work this time was setting in. My mother, her voice tinged with desperation, dialed one hotel after another, each call ending in disappointment. "Nothing," she said, her voice cracking slightly as she hung up the phone. "Everywhere is booked solid." My father, trying to maintain some semblance of control, suggested, "Perhaps we could find a local inn or a bed and breakfast." I watched them, the weight of my actions settling in. The room was silent, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning. The tension was palpable, a stark contrast to the usual jovial atmosphere of our vacations. Mark, still standing awkwardly, finally spoke up again. "Alex, I didn't realize how much this meant to you. I'm sorry if I've been blind to how you felt all these years." His words hung in the air, a rare admission from the brother who had always been the center of attention. I could see the sincerity in his eyes, a shift from his typical demeanor. "I just wanted us to be seen as equals," I replied, my voice softer. Now, the edge of defiance dulled by the unfolding events. "Not just for what we've done, but for who we are." The conversation paused as my parents continued their futile search. My mother, her usual sharpness replaced by a weary tone, finally put down her phone. "There's nothing. We might have to take up your offer, Alex." The idea of sleeping in the car, once a jest, now loomed as a real possibility. I could see the discomfort on their faces, the realization of how their actions had repercussions. "This isn't about revenge," I said, breaking the silence. "It's about understanding. Maybe, just maybe, this will help us all see each other differently." Mark nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I think I'm starting to get it. I've always been in the spotlight, but maybe it's time I stepped aside a bit." The night deepened, and, with it, the reality of our situation. My parents, their options exhausted, began to gather their things, preparing to make the best of the situation. As they moved towards the door, my father paused, looking back at me. "Alex, we owe you an apology. We've been so caught up in our own expectations, we've overlooked yours." His words, simple yet profound, struck a chord. My mother, her eyes reflecting a mix of regret and hope, added, "We'll find a way to make this right, not just for tonight, but for all the times we've missed the mark." I watched them, a mix of emotions swirling within me. This night, this unexpected turn, was changing something fundamental in our family dynamic. It was uncomfortable, raw, but perhaps necessary. As they stepped out into the night, heading towards the car, I felt a pang of guilt, but also a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was the beginning of something new, a chance for us to truly see each other, not through the lens of past roles, but as individuals with our own desires and needs. I stood there, alone in the suite, the grandeur of the room now feeling slightly hollow without the presence of my family. The stars outside twinkled, indifferent to the drama unfolding below. But for me, they were a reminder of the vast possibilities ahead, of the potential for change, for understanding, and for a new way of being together. Will this night change the way my family treats me? Only time would tell, but for now, as the night deepened, the reality of the situation hit my parents hard. They sat in the lobby, their faces etched with the lines of a lesson learned too late. Mark, in an uncharacteristic move, offered to sleep in the car, a gesture of solidarity with our parents. I watched from the balcony of my suite, the entire floor to myself, a mix of satisfaction and sadness washing over me. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about making them see, truly see, the dynamics they had fostered. The hotel manager, Mr. Jenkins, approached me with a sympathetic look. "You've made quite the statement tonight, Alex. I hope it brings about the change you seek." I nodded, the weight of my actions settling in. I just wanted them to understand, even if just for one night. The air was thick with the unspoken words of years of favoritism and neglect. My parents, now relegated to the lobby, were a stark contrast to their usual confident selves. Their discomfort was palpable, a reflection of the discomfort I had felt, for years, always in the shadow of Mark's achievements. Mark, for his part, seemed genuinely affected. He sat beside our parents, his posture less assured, his eyes reflecting a newfound awareness. "I never realized how much this meant to you, Alex," he said earlier, his voice carrying a weight of regret. I remembered his words as I looked down at them. The night was quiet. The only sounds were the soft murmurs of my family discussing their next move. My mother, her voice tinged with a mix of frustration and realization, was still on the phone, trying to find any available room in the vicinity. "I think it's important for you all to experience what it's like to be on the outside for once," I had told Mark, my voice firm, yet tinged with a sadness I couldn't fully mask. The conversation from earlier replayed in my mind. My father, his usual calm demeanor shaken, had looked at me with a mix of surprise and respect. "Alex, we owe you an apology. We've been so caught up in our own expectations, we've overlooked yours." His words, simple yet profound, had struck a chord. My mother, her eyes reflecting a mix of regret and hope, had added, "We'll find a way to make this right, not just for tonight, but for all the times we've missed the mark." Now, as I stood alone, the grandeur of the suite felt hollow without the presence of my family. The stars outside twinkled, indifferent to the drama unfolding below. But for me, they were a reminder of the vast possibilities ahead, of the potential for change, for understanding, and for a new way of being together. What will the morning bring for the Thompson family? Would this night be the catalyst for a new beginning? Or would it be just another story of a vacation gone awry? The tension of the evening had shifted something fundamental within us. My parents, now out of their comfort zone, were beginning to see the world through my eyes, if only for a moment. As I lay in bed, the silence of the suite was a stark contrast to the usual noise of our family gatherings. I thought about the years of being overlooked, of feeling like an afterthought, but tonight I had made them feel what I had felt, albeit in a different context. The question remained, Would this night change the way my family treated me? Only time would tell. But for now, the seeds of change had been planted. The dynamics were shifting, and with it, the possibility of a new understanding, a new way of being together. The night was not just about the lack of a room or the grandeur of the suite. It was about the realization that every member of a family deserves recognition and love, not just for what they achieve, but for who they are. And as the stars continued to shine, I felt a sense of peace, knowing that I had stood up, not just for myself, but for the idea of equality within our family. As the sun rose over the Grand Canyon, casting its golden light over the hotel, I could feel the weight of the previous night's events still hanging in the air. My family gathered in the lobby, their faces etched with the fatigue of a night spent in less than ideal conditions. For me, however, it was a night of reflection, of pondering the changes that might come from this bold move. My parents approached me, their demeanor markedly different from the usual confidence they exuded. My father, his voice heavy with regret, began, "Alex, we owe you an apology. We've been blind to how our actions have affected you." His words, sincere and raw, cut through the morning silence. My mother, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, nodded in agreement. "We've always loved you, Alex, but we've not shown it well. This trip, it's opened our eyes." Her voice trembled slightly, a sign of the emotional turmoil she was wrestling with. Mark, who had always been the center of attention, stood back, his expression one of contemplation. "I'm sorry too, Alex. I guess I got used to being the center of attention," he admitted, his usual bravado replaced by a genuine sense of remorse. The rest of the trip unfolded differently. My parents made an effort to include me in decisions, to listen to my thoughts. It was as if they were seeing me for the first time, not just as the quiet one, but as someone with opinions and feelings. That mattered. Mark and I talked, really talked, for the first time in years. We shared stories, laughed about old times, and even discussed our dreams and fears. It was a conversation long overdue. As we prepared to leave the hotel, my parents thanked Mr. Jenkins, the hotel manager, for his understanding and kindness. He gave me a knowing smile. "Sometimes a little shock is what's needed to shake things up," he said, his words a gentle reminder of the impact my actions had. Driving away from the hotel, I felt a mix of emotions swirling within me. There was relief, certainly, that my family had acknowledged their oversight. But there was also a lingering uncertainty. Had my bold move brought us closer together, or had it created a rift that might never heal? The landscape of the Grand Canyon, with its vast, awe-inspiring beauty, seemed to mirror the complexity of our family dynamics. It was beautiful, yes, but also rugged and unforgiving, much like the journey we had embarked upon. The trip had changed us, not just in how we saw each other, but in how we would move forward as a family. My parents, once so set in their ways, now seemed open to change, to seeing me not just as their son, but as an individual with my own path to follow. Mark, too, had shown a side of himself that I hadn't seen before, a willingness to step back and let others shine. As we drove, the silence in the car was different this time. It wasn't filled with the usual chatter about Mark's achievements or my parents' plans. Instead, it was a reflective silence, each of us lost in our thoughts, contemplating the new dynamics we had to navigate. I glanced out the window, watching the canyon fade into the distance. The question lingered in my mind. Did my actions truly bring us closer, or had I merely exposed the cracks in our family's foundation? Only time would reveal the answer. But for now, I held on to the hope that this trip had indeed been the catalyst for a new beginning, one where recognition and love were not just for achievements, but for who we are as individuals within the family. The journey back was quiet, but within that quiet there was a promise of change, a potential for understanding, and perhaps a new way of being together. And as we drove, I felt a sense of peace, knowing that I had stood up not just for myself, but for the idea of equality within our family. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you enjoyed this story. This will help us create more engaging stories for you.